Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to be in verses 1 through 12. Now, you may recognize as soon as you turn to it that we're going to be talking about the wise men, right? We're going to be talking about the wise men. Before we get to the wise men, let's talk about some other wise men that we might have some impact on our life today. Give it a think for a second, if you will, on what might be one. Think about all the writings in the world, and give it a think for a second what you think might be one of the most influential writings in the past 1,000 years. Okay? One of the most influential writings, one of the most impactful writings, one of the most important writings of the past 1,000 years. And to take you off the hook before you ever, there's nothing in the Bible that was written in the past 1,000 years. Okay? Everything's older in the Bible than 1,000 years that was written. So, yes, normally the correct answer is the Bible or Jesus or whatever, but look, I'm thinking somewhere else. Okay? What's one of the most impactful, one of the most influential, one of the most important things that have been written in the past 1,000 years?
Declaration of Independence.
Man, do you know that the Declaration, okay, because I was thinking I was going to see if anybody yelled out maybe like some of Shakespeare's writing, right? Romeo and Juliet. Huh? I Have a Dream. Martin Luther's speech would have been, Martin Luther Jr.'s speech would have been fantastic. Einstein's theory of relativity would have been okay, right? Because that is important to the world. And then the question should have been like to the world, because I'm talking about impact, and you may be specifically thinking about what's impactful to me, but to the world, past 1,000 years, some would argue like the Quran would have been. It's very impactful to the world. But no, what I'm thinking about on everybody's top list is the Declaration. Did you know that the Declaration of Independence was not the Declaration of Independence? Do you know what the name of the Declaration of Independence was originally? The Unanimous Declaration of the 13 States of the United States. The 13 States of America, not of the United States. The 13 States of America. The Unanimous Declaration of the 13 States of America was the original title. At some point in time, we started adding more states, and somebody was like, you know what? It'd be a little bit more spiffy if we just called it the Declaration of Independence. They hit a home run. Declaration of Independence it was. It's one of the most impactful writings in the past 1,000 years because everyone's used it. During the French Revolution, the government then shifted. And why is it impactful, by the way? It's the very first time in history, the very first time in all of world history, that representatives of the people chose their own government, type of government. Never has that occurred before. Never has there been a group of people that stood up together and said, okay, you know what, we would like to be ruled by a king, or we'd like to be ruled by an emperor, or whatever, and they declared that government. It's never happened before that the people chose. Now, they've always told that this is the way it's going to be, and you can help choose, but they never before, the people never had representatives gathered together and chose their electing ruling system. And so now, like during the French Revolution and all the way to the UN Charter, to all the countries that are formed, it is used as a model. It is used as a model and thing. And they consider that the minds that created it, Thomas and Jefferson penned it, but the men that gathered together and came up with the Declaration of Independence are considered some of the most wise, knowledgeable geniuses of our time. And so I wanted to look at this for a second, a quote from the Declaration of Independence as we start today, because it's very pertinent to everything. This is the Declaration of Independence, the beginning of it and everything, but let's get down here. You probably recognize this. You probably heard it at some point in time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there's a lot there. I love that even then they had the foresight and the wisdom to know that all men are created equal, and that's because that we were all created by the Creator. I love all of that and everything, okay? But what I want to focus on is that at this point in time, they're talking about certain rights that we have, certain things that we desire, right? Because these men were gathered together to represent the people because we were throwing off the yoke of tyranny. We were setting aside the oppression that we were under, and most people were like, it's because of the taxes. No, taxes were the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was because of the right to worship in the manner that they wished to worship God. But they were throwing off oppression and they were writing this up, and it makes sense that they were like at the core of what every man needs, at the core of what every woman needs, at the core of what everyone needs is life. I need life. That should be number one, right? It is. I need to live. Liberty. They've been under oppression, so freedom. But what really stands out is that they understood that the core, one of our core needs is the pursuit of happiness. Now, before pointing this out and following the wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, who penned this, if I was to ask you a question, if you could write down some things that you find are vitally important, like you have rights to, most people wouldn't understand that at our core is the need for happiness. You might write down, I need a house, or I need land to live on, or I need a provision of food, or whatever, right? They didn't write any of those things. I'm sure that they thought those things. We all need water and food and lodging and everything, and that might fall up under the category of life, but they didn't write those things. They wrote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because at our core, we need joy. We need happiness. And we spend a lifetime pursuing it in good and bad ways. We pursue it with our careers and with relationships. We can pursue it in our vices. We pursue it in all different ways, some way to bring joy into our life. And we've never lived at a time where we have more things to distract us, more things to do, to fill in the void of trying to just run after joy. So I want to tell you today the exact thing that we need for joy, and we can see it in the story of the wise men. In Matthew 2, 1 through 12, I'm going to read through this section once. It says, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it is written by the prophet, And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, and by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen, when it rose, went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So here in this story it says the Magi came. Now in other depictions it says the kings came, and in other it's the wise men. We always depict them in our nativity scenes normally as 3 wise men or 3 kings or 3 magi and everything. There's never a number given. We give that number because of the amount of gifts. We had just make an assumption that because there's 3 gifts that there was 3 people given those gifts, but it never gives a numerical value to how many of them were actually there. But if I cross over, it's just because I'm picturing the nativity scene, as many as you might as well. But these magi, these wise men, these kings, these men that not only had I don't know what word I'm looking for, but that were these rich men that had influence, that had wisdom. They came and they sought after Christ. And in their story, we can see the joy of seeking after Christ. Now, why did I say that there was joy of seeking after Christ? Well, follow me again. I'm going to just read through verses 1 through 2 again. It says, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose up, and we have come to worship him. Now, the reason they're called magi is because during this period of time and everything, people of knowledge that followed astronomy, right? They watched the heavens, they watched the stars, and they studied the stars. We know also that they studied wisdom and literature because they come from the Far East. They're not Jews, or it would denoted that. They're from a different culture, so they must read a lot of readings if they've also dived into the Old Testament, into Jewish writings and everything, and they knew the signs to look for even Jesus. And then when they see something in the skies that they study and everything that is different, they realize that this points back to another reading that they have also studied, that this is pointing to the King of Jews coming. This is pointing towards a Messiah that they don't even follow, but they know that it's pointing to him. They know that this is pointing towards the Creator, and so they're well-studied men. They're watching the skies, and they see this star. This is out of the norm. They go to prophecy. They see that, and then they strike out. They strike out on this journey, right? Isn't that crazy to you? If it's not crazy to you, then let me take you down a rabbit trail that maybe will help you think that that's crazy. I think I talked about this in a life group one night, but I'm going to use it here in the message. Not long ago, I read an article. It's about a young lady. And there's no way that I can share this article that it doesn't sound like there's judgment coming from me, because I hear myself talking. There really is no judgment. I thought she did a really good job of explaining her position, and I thought it was a well-written article and everything. It just shows the difference between my generation and her generation. But she was a millennial, or she may have been a Gen Zer. I'm not really sure, because I don't know exactly the divide there, nor do I care. But there is, but she wrote this article, and she was talking in this article about the fact that unlike some of her peers, she had worked most of her life. She worked since she was like 16 in part-time jobs. She went to college, and she worked to help provide her way through college. She got a great degree, and now she has a great job with a pretty good salary. But now that she has this great job, she's working 40 hours a week, and she said she feels like nobody told her that working 40 hours a week, even though she's worked a lot of her life, that working 40 hours a week, that she wouldn't have time to enjoy life. When I read that, that was just like a splash of cold water in my face from my generation. It felt like, right? Like I was like, what? You know, and that makes no sense. And then, you know, I really gave it some thought. Everybody in here by this point in time, if you don't know, I share all kinds of stuff about me, hopefully not so you know more about Danny Lewis. Forget everything about Danny Lewis, but that you might apply things. But you've probably heard me say, I grew up in Georgia. I grew up in Blakely, Georgia. But my family comes from, as the crow flies, about 10 miles from there in a place called Arlington, Georgia. Now, Arlington, Georgia is smaller than Blakely, Georgia, but it's a little place. And we're fortunate enough to have a little bit of history there because my great-great-grandfather started a farm there, and then my great-grandfather built onto this farm, and so that house and that property is still in the family. My granddaddy was there, my dad and his brothers and sisters were raised there. That property passed on to my uncle, and so we still have this property in our family. And when you go there, it's very interesting because, yes, over time, running water's been put into the place and electricity's been put in place. But it's a very old house. It's not one of those houses that you really, really want to live in because now, like, my uncle hasn't done a whole bunch. I'm not even sure that there's insulation in the house. So, like, insulation means that during the winter, you just throw in more blankets, right? Like, that's how you sleep. You just can't move at night in the bed and everything. But this house, like if you go outside, there's still an outhouse. Now there's an inside bathroom now. But like when my dad's generation, even in my dad's generation, they still used an outhouse. My dad's generation, they still went outside and they pumped the water and brought the water inside. Again, now there's running water, there's electricity and stuff like that. But they did that, right? In my dad's generation. I would hear my dad tell stories. Now, my dad's stories were not as hard as my granddad and my great-uncle's stories. But I would hear stories from my dad and my uncles and stuff about how they would have to get up early in the morning. They would have different duties. There was always chopping of wood, even when it wasn't cold outside, because all the stove was wood burning. And they were cooking in there. My aunts and my grandmother were cooking in the kitchen almost around the clock to feed a family of 9. Okay? They stayed in there. They all had their chores. And my uncles and them would get up, and somebody would have to go out, and they would have to pump the water for all the baths and for all the food and everything for the day, and they'd bring water inside by pails and stuff like that. They feed the animals, and they had all this stuff to do, and their chores extended from early in the morning, before the sun came up, to the end of day. Okay? Crazy. And then we have all these items still at that old house that depict what life was like back then. And one of the things that stood out to me is that we still have these steel, and a couple of them, steel or iron, whatever they are, irons that you iron clothes with, that my grandmother and my aunts would put into the fireplace, because there's no electricity, and they would get them hot, pull them out, wrap rags around them, and press clothes. Okay, I'm sharing this all for a reason, right? I don't want you to think that when my dad was doing all of this in the 1940s and 50s and everything, right, that time was in the history of mankind, the worst things that were going on in mankind, the hardships that were going on were centered around the 1940s and 50s. No, what I'm trying to point out to you, and what I really want you to grasp hold of, is that time does not get harder. As generations pass, it's gotten easier and easier and easier with each generation, with all the inventions and all the technology that we have, to the point where if we're working a 40-hour week, we really feel like we're overloaded, right? It's just gotten easier. It hasn't gotten harder. Well, don't think for a minute that all the things that I'm talking about in the 1940s and 50s were not immensely easier than it was in the time that the Magi went on this journey to go see the Messiah. And why am I pointing that out? For a very important reason. You know, in that story it says that the Magi, that they took off, they saw the star, and then they took off to go and see this King of the Jews. Well, when they get to Herod, remember what it says? Herod said, at what point in time do you see this star? Because Herod is trying to figure out exactly when this baby is born. Now, it doesn't tell this to the Magi. The Magi are not aware of what Herod's plans are. They probably get some bad feelings and stuff. But they don't know until the dream sent to them not to return to Herod, to not return to Herod. But what we see later on in the story is that Herod, based off of what they tell him about the time of the star, Herod then decrees, orders that all the children that came to Bethlehem during that time that are 3 years and up, 3 years and down, are to be murdered. So based off the time that they first saw the star, from the time that they get to Herod, there's been a 3-year period of time. 3 years. Now, I don't know how much of that time the Magi, the wise men, the king, 3 kings, whatever you want to call them, set up to prepare to start out on their journey, and how much of that was journey. But for 3 years, in a time that was immensely more difficult than it is in our lives right now, where there are many things that were calling upon their time, they put aside everything to pursue after Jesus. Now these men, they were influential, they're wise, they have wealth. They didn't accrue that just because they were lazy in a time where it's hard. No, they did that because they were applying themselves, and they had that. Now, to imagine for a second, can I imagine for a second if I told you this morning that I think it would be beneficial to each one of you to spend more time with Christ, and that I'm asking you this morning that this week that you set aside your affairs for one day to just fast and pray on Jesus. Can you imagine? I allow this. Take yourself out of the equation. I'm not even going to put you on the hook and make you squirm with the excuses that you would give me. Can you imagine the excuses that everybody else would give? Well, I can't do that. I can't do that. You don't know how important my time is. You don't know what I have going on Thursday. You don't know this or anything else. You don't know, right? One day. How valuable did they see Christ that for at least 3 years, and this discounting the journey back, that at least 3 years of their life, that they just set it over to the side, and they said the most valuable thing that we could do with our lives is to pursue after this Christ. Amen? And so they followed the star. And we too are called to seek after and pursue Christ. Jeremiah 29:13 says, "You will seek me and find me, and when you seek me with all your heart," right? We're the pursuit of Christ. We spend all our lives pursuing happiness. And it's right there in Christ. Right there in Christ. I hope you recognize that this morning. And then we see in their story not only the joy that they had in pursuing Christ and setting everything aside, but their joy in encountering Christ. It filled them with exceeding joy. It said in Matthew 2:10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Now, this portion of the star is that when they saw the star and that it set over them and they knew that they were right there upon Christ, that they had come upon Him, they rejoiced exceedingly because they were finally encountering Christ. Now, I know that in our stories, if you're putting the timeline together, in our depictions of the nativity, we normally have the shepherds and the wise men and all that together. That wouldn't have been the case. 3 years have passed. The shepherds would have come across Christ while He's still in Bethlehem, in the stable, in the manger, but we don't know exactly where the wise men encountered Jesus, but the star is still guiding them to Jesus, right? And then they show up and they bring with them these gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh and all these valuable things, because at the time this is the most valuable thing that they could bring. You ever thought about that? Why did they bring the gifts? You think they brought the gifts because in their studies they realized that maybe the Messiah was going to be poor, because it had been prophesied that He was going to be born to a virgin and that He was going to be born in swaddling clothes and in a manger and everything, and they thought, okay, well, He's going to be poor and we're going to bring Him something of value so that this little king of the Jews, He'll have money? No, think about that. Think about that. These men are wise men that study the heavens. You know what that means? You know what the heavens meant for the people back in that generation all the way up to the last 2 or 3 centuries? They would study the stars for navigations, for signs and everything. What they understood about the stars is that this was a fixed point. And that if you have 2 or 3 fixed points, then you can navigate yourself around, right? What was different is that this star wasn't a fixed point. Instead of this star being something that was fixed, this star was following a fixed point on earth. That was different. That was supernatural. That was different than everything that had ever occurred before. And so they followed the star to the fixed point, which was Christ. And when they encountered Christ, do you think for a minute that they thought that the person who had authority over the heavens, that had possession of the stars themselves, needed gold, myrrh, or frankincense? What could you bring of value to the Creator? You couldn't. So why'd they bring the gifts? They brought what they value and set it at his feet so that they could communicate and proclaim that they saw his value. They realized that in all the things that they could accrue and all the things in their life, that there was nothing more valuable than Christ. And they set it at his feet. They were transformed by the joy that they had in their encounter with Jesus. It brings about that joy, and it brings about that joy in our life. In Psalm 16:11, it says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." You know, Christ, He renews our hearts. He fills the voids in our life. We seek after so many different things, some good, some bad, to fill those voids. Like fame or authority or wealth or materials, relationships, all these things to fill our void. You know what Solomon said? Solomon, in the Bible, it explains that Solomon is the richest, most influential man that's ever lived. God blessed him in this manner. And Solomon says that in all his influence and all his riches that he pursued in life every pleasure known to man. Every pleasure known to man. And that none of them brought fulfillment. None of them brought joy. That only God can do that. Only God. We encounter Christ through prayer and through study and through fellowship. We truly encounter Him, then that joy is ours too. But don't dismiss this when I say truly encounter Him, because a lot of time we're living such distracted lives that even when we enter into the house of worship, our hearts nor our minds are centered on Christ. They're still centered on what's going on in our life, things that are on our checklist. We're not encountering Him. And we don't understand why we don't feel that completeness. Isaiah 55:6 says, "Seek the Lord while He may be found, and call upon Him while He is near." And then lastly, one thing that we see from these wise men about joy is their joy in sharing Christ. In Matthew 2:12 it says, "And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way." See, they left the presence of Christ with overflowing joy, but they were warned not to go back to Herod. That joy extended beyond their personal experience and it flowed outward. We have this story today because they were spreading what they had found that day, right? We're called in the same manner to share this joy. A lot like last weekend. Not to bottle it up, but to spread it out into the community. In 1 Peter 3:15 it says, "But in your hearts, honor Christ. The Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." Our joy should be contagious. There's a period in time where I was trying to think up of maybe a t-shirt or a graphic or something that I would appreciate. But then again, as I'm constantly reminded, I am morbid. But like I would like to have something that was like a Christian zombie, right? Like, because everybody pictures the zombies running around in the world of just biting people, and the minute they're bit, then somebody else becomes a zombie, and nobody depicts the fact that how the zombie's life might be good. But it doesn't matter. But when you picture that, we get that. We get anybody that's in contact with a zombie can become a zombie, right? Christianity should be like that. It should be infectious. Right? Instead of like, oh, I don't know if I should talk about Christ or not. Right? Like all timid and stuff like that. Maybe next time I'll let them know that I go to church, but we're far from letting them know that I'm a Christian. Right? No, it should be infectious. It should be something that just flows out from us, and when people come in contact with us, they can't help but to be caught up in it. That's how it should be. And that's because the joy that spills out from us. You know how much easier it is? You get how much easier it is to be around somebody that's joyful and somebody that's sad. Right? I'm going to make you raise your hands. How draining, does it drain any of y'all to be around somebody that's complaining? If it does, raise your hand, right? Now, does it drain you to be around somebody that's happy?
Only in the morning.
You literally just drained me right then. Right? Because it's contagious. Right? You can't. You're going to do one or two things, Brandon. You're going to do one or two things. When you're around somebody that's got joy, you're going to be either like, I'm not ready to experience that, and I'm going to separate myself from it, or you're going to catch yourself smiling and experience joy too because it's contagious. You'll have to remove yourself from the situation because you're irritated, or you're going to be caught up in it. That's what Christ brings. In Luke 15:10 it says, just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Right? When we're sharing the good news of Christ, not only is God joyed, the angels are in joy. You know the story of the shepherds where they're singing in joy over the birth of Christ. Joy to the world. I won't sing anymore. But there's joy, and there's joy in that. There's joy in our life when we encounter Him, when we share Him, because that's truly where happiness comes from, is in the presence of God. My closing thought this morning, my challenge this morning has been the same thing this whole season. It will continue to be the same thing, is when you leave out of here this morning, so many things to focus on. I added one more thing, right? Breakfast items. Need to remember to pick that up at the grocery store. You've got so much going on in your life. So much. The more that we have in advances and inventions and technologies and stuff, also it seems like the more craziness we've incorporated into our lives, and that we have so much on our plates to distract us. But as you go out this week and you're focused on the engagements that you have, on the priorities that you have, on making sure all the gifts that you have, none of those things, including the gifts, are going to fill the void of your need of that happiness if you set aside Christ. If you set aside Christ. Yeah, it's a slogan that's been out there forever, and we've seen the slogan so much that we just see the slogan and want to dismiss it because we're tired of hearing it. But He is the reason for the season, right? He is what we're celebrating. Not the lighting of the Christmas tree, not the parties that we're going to, not the gifts that we're going to get or the gifts that we're going to give. But Him. Pursue Him this week. Treasure your encounters and share Him. And you'll truly experience joy as we're going towards Christmas this week. This morning I'm going to ask Matthew to come up, and he's going to sing another song, another good song, that we can celebrate this gift of joy this morning. Let's stand.